The other two defectors that I met had similar stories, and their stories are detailed in the report in more depth. But they said, when we arrested people, and often they would arrest Rohingyas in order to extort money and demand money from their families. But they said we arrested only Rohingyas in that area. So I think that's important corroboration of this information. This is the border, and one of the tragedies of Burma is that all of the borders are, as those who come from those areas will know well, all of those borders are stunningly beautiful. And it's very hard to reconcile the human misery of what's happening there with the natural beauty of that landscape. So this is, I'm standing on the Bangladesh side looking across to Burma. This is one of the worst camps. This is one of the unregistered camps where the people have no assistance at all. They are living in horrific shelter. Their situation, in my mind, and I've travelled in some of the areas of internally displaced peoples in other parts of Burma, and the conditions that they were living in reminded me of the conditions that the IDPs are living in. I met refugees, and I'll come on to some individual stories in just a moment. I just want to give you a feel for the camps. This now is I believe this is the Lido camp. Am I correct in saying that? We have a friend here.
Yes, it may be. This was just after they moved.
That's right.
They were in even worse conditions on the side of the Tal River, and then they were moved during the interim government of Bangladesh, who gave some forestry land for them. Yeah, this was immediately after they moved.
That's right.
Yeah.
And as you can see, this is marginally better than the previous place that that I showed you. And from all the accounts I heard, it's a lot better than the previous location this camp had been in. But still, the conditions are miserable, particularly in the wet season. I walked down these paths. I went into people's homes. Water was dripping in through the ceiling, but also seeping up through the ground, and really miserable conditions for them to live in. This is back in that earlier camp that I showed you. And in those camps where they have no NGOs providing assistance, they have really no access to healthcare. The only healthcare that they said they can get, if they can get any money or provision to do so, is to go to the nearby town and try and get medical care there if it's serious enough. This young lady was seriously sick. This is her father with her, and we were in a position very discreetly to provide help for them to go into the nearby town, because otherwise she would have had absolutely no medical care at all. But that was only because we happened to be there on that day, and we happened to meet them, and we happened to be able to help in some way. But much of the time, their situation is hopeless. I felt when I was talking to people that there was a real feeling of hopelessness and despair, and you could almost see it in their eyes. There was a real, they were at the end of their tether, a complete sense of despair. And I think that is not only because of the horrific suffering that Khin has described and the conditions that they live in as refugees, but I think at the heart of all this is the issue of citizenship and statelessness, and that's why I've called this presentation, The Rohingya, a stateless people, because, as Khin has already said, inside Burma they are denied citizenship. They're heavily restricted in terms of movement, marriage and access to education. And yet when they're in Bangladesh, they're also not treated as citizens or even as given refugee rights. In fact, the quote that Khin used, I was also going to use, because refugees themselves said this to me. They said, in Burma, the authorities tell us, you're Bengali, go back to Bangladesh. In Bangladesh, the authorities tell us, you're from Burma, go back to Burma, where do we go? And one person actually used that same phrase, we're caught between a crocodile and a snake. Young people in the camps have almost no access to education. And again, this atmosphere of sheer hopelessness. As I just share these images, it's worth also highlighting that a senior UN official, and I was told this by a senior diplomat from Rangoon, a senior UN official who had served in all kinds of humanitarian disaster areas. He'd served in Darfur, he'd served in Somalia, and he'd served in various other places. And he was someone who, in the words of this diplomat who told me, he was someone who knows human misery when he sees it. He recently described the situation in Northern Arakan State as bad as anything he has seen in terms of the denial of basic human freedoms. He'd served in Darfur, he'd served in Somalia, and he says the Rohingya situation is as bad as those in terms of the denial of freedom. I'll try and press these without standing in the way. Can you still see?
Yeah. Yes.
I talked about despair and hopelessness, and I also talked about the lack of access to further education. I think the one thing that gave me cause for hope, but it still illustrates the catch-22 situation that they're in, is I met a number of young people who actually came out secretly to meet me outside the camps, and they told me that they are working as volunteer teachers in the camps to try and give some informal education in place of, in continuation beyond the age of 12 to young people. But they're not trained as teachers, and as one of them put it to me, they're 18 years old, and he said, I am compelled to teach because he's seen his fellow young people denied education. I'm compelled to teach, but I prefer to learn. If I stay like this, with no further education, my future life will be ruined. So these young people are sacrificing their future at the moment by trying to help people a few years younger than them. But they are people who should still be in education themselves. I visited a clinic, and this was at Lido as well.
Side, yeah.
I have to say this was actually one of the other, I don't want to say causes for hope, but one of the other brighter spots in the otherwise bleak picture. The clinic was, I was encouraged by, although still the provision is very basic, and the access to it is still extremely limited. But there were a lot of people waiting to use the services of the clinic.